You already know this story, everyone does. Julius Caesar burned the Great Library of Alexandria, and the wisdom of the ancient world went up in a single night of fire. It is one of the saddest things you were ever taught. It is also almost certainly wrong. The library did not die in one fire. It died slowly, over centuries, of something far more ordinary than flame. And the man who could tell you the difference was standing on the docks the night the harbour burned, holding scrolls he had no right to touch. His name was Theon. I should say at once that this name is a composite, stitched from several real people of the era, from the slave cataloguers named on Ptolemaic ostraca, from the freedman scribes Strabo met in the museum, from the wage records of educated household slaves in Roman Egypt. The day is real. The fire is real. The man is a face I have built so you have someone to walk beside. It is before dawn in Alexandria, in the autumn of 48 years before the birth of Christ. You wake the way Theon wakes, on a straw pallet in a windowless cell behind the museum, and the first thing you know is the smell. Salt, always salt, the harbour breathing through every wall of this city. Under it, the green rot of the canal. And under that, faint, the thing that should not be there yet, wood smoke drifting from the direction of the royal harbour, where for 3 weeks now there have been Roman ships that did not come to trade. You are perhaps 30. You do not know the year of your own birth for certain. You were sold as a boy, somewhere in the hill country of Ionia, when your father's debts came due and a creditor counted the children instead of the coins. You remember a road. You remember a man writing your description on a wax tablet. Height, teeth, the scar on your left hand. After that, the memory closes like a door. What you have instead of a childhood is Greek letters. Someone early noticed the boy could read, and a reading slave is worth 4 times a digging one. So they kept your eyes and your hands and sold the rest of you down the coast until you came here, to the museum, the Mausion, the House of the Muses, the greatest collection of written knowledge the world has ever held. You are not a scholar. Let us be exact about that, because the films and the paintings get it wrong. The Library of Alexandria was not run by serene old philosophers in white robes. It ran on people like you, slaves and freedmen who could read 3 scripts, who knew where the scroll on the diseases of horses was shelved, who could mend a torn papyrus and re-ink a faded title. The mind of the ancient world was kept alive by hands that did not own themselves. You rise. You drink water from a clay cup. There is bread from yesterday, hard, and you eat it walking, because the head cataloguer, a freedman named Apollonios, who was a slave himself once and never lets you forget that he climbed out, wants the eastern shelving counted before the scholars come. You cross a courtyard where the sky is going from black to the colour of a bruise. A peacock, the Ptolemies keep them, they keep everything, screams somewhere in the dark, and your skin tightens. Inside the long halls. This is what no painting shows you correctly. Not shelves of leather books. Books did not exist yet, not as you picture them. What surrounds you are scrolls, papyrus rolled around wooden dowels, thousands upon thousands of them, lying in pigeonholes cut into the walls, each with a little tag of papyrus hanging from its end like a tongue. How many? The ancient writers cannot agree, which tells you they are guessing. Aulus Gellius, writing a couple of centuries later, says 700,000. Seneca, in a passing line, says 40,000 burned in the fire. I think the truth is that no one ever counted them all, that the number was a thing people said, the way we say a city has millions, meaning only more than I can hold in my mind. You can hold a great deal in your mind. That is your value. You know that the works of Aristotle are in the 3rd hall, that the medical scrolls smell faintly of the cedar oil used to keep the worms out, that a roll left in damp air will bloom with mould along its spine in a single week. Your fingers are stained black to the 2nd knuckle, ink that no washing has taken out in 15 years. When you are very tired, you cannot feel the difference between the cold of the marble and the cold of your own hands. By the liturgical reckoning of the temples, this is an ordinary day, sacred to no god in particular. By the reckoning of the city, it is the 3rd week of a war no one asked for. You do not understand it fully. Slaves are told little, but you have pieced it together from the talk of the scholars who gossip over your head as if you were furniture. The old king is dead. His children, a boy and a girl, both claim the throne, brother and sister, husband and wife in the strange Ptolemaic way, and they hate each other. The girl is called Cleopatra. The boy king's men drove her out, and then a Roman came. A Roman general, chasing his rival across the world, sailed into the harbour with a handful of ships and far too few men, and somehow installed himself in the palace, and somehow the queen got to him. There is a story, which I cannot prove, and which Plutarch tells with relish, that she had herself smuggled to him, rolled inside a bedsack or a carpet. Now the boy king's army has the Roman penned in the palace quarter by the great harbour, and the Roman's name, which you have heard the scholars say with a mixture of fear and excitement, is Gaius Julius Caesar. None of this is your concern. Your concern is the eastern shelving, and the Count Apollonius wants, and the new shipment of scrolls that came up from the customs house at the harbour 2 days ago, and now sits in crates by the door, undocumented, a sin against order. You kneel by the first crate. You lift out a roll, unstop it, read the opening line to know what it is, and reach for your reed and your ink to write its tag. This is the work. This is the whole of your life, this small, holy act, done 10,000 times, to take a thing that has been written and make sure it can be found again. It does not sound like much. But understand, the difference between a library and a rubbish heap is not the scrolls. It is the knowing where they are. 100,000 books no one can find is not knowledge. It is only weight. You, the slave with the black fingers, are the thread that makes the labyrinth a library. You do not yet know that before this day is over, you will be standing knee-deep in the harbour, watching that thread burn. Outside, far off toward the water, the wood smoke smell thickens for a moment, then thins again. You do not look up. You write the tag. You reach for the next scroll. The doors banged open at the 3rd hour, and a slave you did not know ran the length of the hall, shouting for Apollonios, and the quiet that you had been building all morning came apart like a wet seam. You could not hear the words from where you knelt. You saw Apollonios go still, then nod twice, then turn and look down the hall at all of you with a face you had not seen on him before. Not anger, which you knew, not contempt, which you knew better, but a careful blankness, the look of a man deciding how much to say. He clapped his hands. The shipments from the harbour were to stop. No more scrolls would come up from the customs house until further word. The work would go on as before. He said it lightly. He was lying lightly, and you all knew it, and you all bent back to your scrolls because there was nothing else to do. Here is the thing about a great catastrophe, the thing the histories never quite tell you. It does not announce itself. It arrives wearing the clothes of an ordinary inconvenience. A shipment delayed, a door left open, a smell on the wind that thickens and thins. So you worked. Let me show you the work, because it is more remarkable than the fire, and almost no one remembers it. The cataloguing of Alexandria was not chaos tamed by genius in a single stroke. It was a system, and the system had a maker, a poet and scholar named Callimachus, who had died long before you were born, but whose method ruled your hands every day. He had made the pinakes, the tables, a vast catalogue in 120 scrolls, listing the authors of everything the library held, divided into classes: rhetoric, law, epic, tragedy, medicine, mathematics, miscellany. Each author with a short life, the first words of each work, the number of lines. The first words mattered more than you might think. There were no titles as you know them. You found a scroll not by a name on a spine, but by its opening line, the way you might know a song only by how it begins. So when you unrolled a medical scroll and read its first line, on the regimen of acute diseases, you did not simply file it. You checked it against the Pinakes class for medicine, against the Hippocratic corpus, against the dozen near copies that the library, hungry and acquisitive, had gathered over 200 years. The Ptolemies had a law, and I am not certain it is wholly true, but the physician Galen reports it as fact, that every ship entering the harbour of Alexandria was searched, not for contraband, but for books. Any scroll found aboard was seized, copied by the library's scribes, and the copy returned to the owner while the original stayed. They called these the ship's books. A city that stole knowledge the way other cities stole gold. You were a small cog in that theft. You did not mind. A scroll copied is a scroll that does not die when its single owner dies, and you, who had watched everything you loved be taken and sold, understood in your black-fingered bones why a thing should exist in more than one place. By midday the heat had come up off the marble, and the hall smelled of warm dust and cedar oil and the particular sweetish reek of old papyrus, which is not unpleasant once it is in your blood. The scholars drifted in. They ignored you, as always. Two of them argued in the third hall about a line of Homer, whether a word meant swift or destroying, a quarrel 3 centuries old that they conducted as if the city were not at war a half-mile away. I have come to love them a little for that, those infuriating men. The world was burning at the harbour, and they were fighting about an adjective. There is something in that which is either the height of human folly or the height of human dignity, and I have spent a long time unable to decide which, and I think now it is both. In the afternoon, Apollonios set you to a task you hated, culling. The library took everything, and everything is too much. Periodically, the duplicates and the rubbish, student exercises, miscopied drafts, scrolls so worm-eaten the text was lost, were pulled to be sold for scrap papyrus or burned for the bathhouse furnaces. You worked through a crate of these condemned things, checking each one a final time in case some fool had thrown a treasure in with the trash, which happened. And in that crate, near the bottom, you found a child's writing exercise. You knew it at once for what it was. A cheap scroll, the papyrus course, the kind a poor family bought for a son they hoped to make a scribe. On it, copied over and over in a small, careful hand, growing tired toward the bottom, was a line of moral verse, the sort every Greek boy copied. Practice nothing base, for what is base does not endure. Below the careful lines, the hand had wandered. A drawing of a dog, a list of names that were not in the lesson, a father's name, a sister's, scratched the way a child writes the people he loves into the margins of his work, and a date by the regnal year that made the boy, if he still lived, about the age you had been when the creditor counted you. You sat on the cold floor with the dead child's homework in your stained hands, and you could not move. I want to be careful here. I am reconstructing what a man like Theon would have felt, and no scroll records his heart. But I have held such exercises myself in the glass cases of the Egyptian collections, the real ones, the ones that survived in the dry rubbish mounds of Egypt. A child's alphabet, a teacher's correction in a heavier ink, and I have never once managed to read them as data. So I will let Theon feel what I felt. He thought of a road. He thought of a wax tablet and a man writing down his teeth and his scar. He thought that somewhere there had perhaps been a scroll like this with his own loved name scratched in the margin, and that it had gone into a furnace under some bathhouse to heat the water for strangers, and that no one had sat on a cold floor and been unable to move. He did not save the scroll. Understand that he could not. A slave who pockets condemned property is a slave who is flogged, or worse, and the boy was almost certainly long dead, and the library's order did not bend for grief. He wrote its tag, marked it for the furnace, and set it on the pile. But he wrote the boy's loved names into his own memory, where there was no catalogue and no cull, and he carried them. It is the only kind of saving a man like that could do. The light through the high windows had gone gold and long. Somewhere outside a horn sounded, 3 notes, military, and then again. Apollonios appeared at the end of the hall and told you, your particular crew of 4, to come with him down toward the harbour stores. There were crates there, he said, the undocumented shipment, the ship's books from the last week of trade before the war closed the port. They were to be brought up tonight, all of them, before... He stopped. Before what, he did not say. He just said, "Tonight, bring what you can carry." You did not know it, walking out of the cool hall into the red evening with the smell of smoke much stronger now, that this was the last ordinary order anyone would give you. You picked up an empty crate. You went toward the water. The horns were sounding again, closer, and down at the edge of the great harbour you could see, for the first time, the orange flicker of something burning on the sea itself. For a moment, on the slope down to the water, you were alone with it. The others had gone ahead. The evening was very still in the way that only a frightened city is still. The shutters closed, the dogs not barking, and you stood with your empty crate and looked at the harbour you had smelled your whole life and never once seen burning. Out on the water, ships were on fire. The Boy King's fleet, or part of it, blazing at anchor. You learned the why of it only later, in fragments, the way a slave learns everything. The Roman, Caesar, penned in the palace quarter with too few men, had judged that he could not let the harbour fleet fall into the hands of the Boy King's general, and so he had ordered the ships fired where they sat. Plutarch tells it in his Life of Caesar, chapter 49, in a single cold sentence, that Caesar, being in danger, was forced to repel the peril by using fire, and that this spread from the dockyards and destroyed the Great Library. Cassius Dio says much the same, and from that one line, written 150 years after, the whole legend grew. Caesar burned the library. You will see tonight how much and how little is true, because the fire on the water did not stay on the water. There was a wind off the sea, the evening wind that every Alexandrian knows, and it carried sparks the size of fists onto the dockyards, and the dockyards were stacked with the most flammable wealth a trading city owns. Pitch, rope, sailcloth, grain in wooden bins, and in the bonded warehouses along the quay, in their crates, waiting to be searched and copied and catalogued, the ship's books. Tens of thousands of scrolls. Not the library itself, which stood safe in its halls up in the palace quarter behind walls of stone. The export stock, the new arrivals, the undocumented shipment Apollonios had sent you to carry up tonight, before. This. He had known. Someone had warned him, and he had tried, and he was too late by an hour. You ran. You should not have. A wiser slave would have set down the crate and walked the other way and let the property of his masters burn, because none of it was his, and his back would pay for any of it that he failed to save, and pay equally for any of it that he tried. But you had spent your life learning that a thing should exist in more than one place, and now here was a place full of things that existed in only one, and the wind was eating it. The warehouse mouth was already smoking when you reached it. Inside, men were hauling crates, soldiers and dockhands and slaves all mixed, no order to it, shouting. The heat came at you like a hand on the face. Apollonios was there, his careful blankness gone, screaming names. Not your name, the names of works, the way only a cataloguer would. The geography in 3 classes, the Aristotle copies, the Hippocratic rolls, as if naming them could pull them out of the fire. You went in. I have to stop and tell you what could and could not be saved, because the romance of this moment has lied to people for 2,000 years. A papyrus scroll does not burn like paper. It is denser, oiled, tight-rolled, and a tight roll is slow to take flame. But once the warehouse roof is alight and the bins of grain catch, the heat alone chars a scroll to a black cylinder without a single spark touching it. You could carry perhaps 6 rolls in a crate, 8 if you stacked them and risked dropping. There were tens of thousands. The arithmetic of it was a cruelty. Every roll you saved was a roll you chose, and choosing meant condemning the rest, and there was no time to read a tag, no time to weigh a treatise on the diseases of horses against a lost play of Sophocles. You grabbed by the armful, you grabbed blind. And in the second armful, by the worst luck or the best, your stained fingers closed on a roll and your eye caught the tag, because 15 years of reading tags does not switch off even in a fire, and the tag, in a hand you did not know, said only, "Child's Lessons, condemned for furnace." Not the same scroll, another. There must have been a whole crate of culled exercises down here, the rubbish swept from the halls, waiting to be burned slowly under a bathhouse, and now waiting to be burned fast. You understand the choice that was in your hands. In one arm, scholarship, the named works, the things Apollonios was screaming for, the things history would mourn. In the other, a dead poor child's homework, worth nothing, catalogued only to be destroyed, a thing the library itself had already sentenced. The fire did not care which you chose. History would not have recorded either way. You had two arms and a path to the door that was narrowing with smoke. I will not pretend I know what Theon did, because no one wrote it down, because men like him are exactly the people history does not write down. But I have told you who he was, and I think you know him now as well as I do. I think the child's lessons went into the crate. I think the named treatises did too, what fit, and the rest he left, and he carried what a man can carry, which is never enough, and he went out through the narrowing door into the air. Behind him, the roof came down. The sound was not dramatic. It was a long, soft collapse, like a wave, and a great breath of sparks went up into the dark over the harbour, and for a moment, and Alexandrians who lived would remember this for the rest of their lives, the surface of the water itself was burning, a skin of pitch and oil and floating debris, alight from the dockyards to the lighthouse, the great pharos throwing its steady flame at the top of the world as if in answer, fire above and fire below, and between them the small black shapes of men running with crates. You waded into the harbour to your knees because the quay was too hot to stand on. The water was warm. Ash fell on it like grey snow and hissed. You stood there, a slave with no name that history kept, holding a crate of scrolls that the world would never know it had lost or saved, and you watched the knowledge of the world come down as soft black flakes onto the sea, and settle and sink. Long after midnight the wind dropped, and the burning on the water guttered out, and the city was very quiet again, and you sat on the cooling stones of the quay with a crate between your feet and did not look inside it. You did not look because you were afraid of the arithmetic. In the dark, you could tell yourself you had saved something that mattered. Daylight would tell you the truth, that you had saved an armful out of a sea, that the ratio of it was so cruel it was almost a joke, and you were not ready for daylight. So you sat. Your hands had stopped shaking. The ink on your fingers had a film of grey ash over it now, the old black under the new grey, and you rubbed at it without thinking, the way you had rubbed at it 10,000 mornings, and it did not come off, the way it never came off. Apollonios found you there near dawn. He sat down beside you, which he had never done, a freedman beside a slave, and for a while he said nothing. Then he told you the thing that I most want you to carry